Hey guys, welcome to Voices of Impact, where your voice matters, your story matters, and we love hearing from guests making an impact all around the globe. Today, we get to speak to a young gentleman, and his name is Bernie Borges. Borges, like gorgeous. I love that. And what I want to do is I want to hand over the microphone and let him explain to us who he is. Go for it.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me on your Voices of Impact podcast. I love your focus, and thank you for calling me young. I haven't been called young in quite a while, so I'll take it. I'll take it. So I'll give you my backstory, and I'll keep it brief. So, born and raised in New York City, left New York when I was 25. The old adage is true: you can take someone out of New York, but you can't take the New York out of them. I'm living proof of that. Went to California when I had to go to California to meet my wife and got married out there. Dragged her kicking and screaming in 1992 to Tampa, Florida to relocate. So I grew up in New York, went to California, was there 10 years, and then moved to Tampa, Florida, where you are. So you and I are kind of neighbors.
Mhm.
Vocationally, I have been in B2B marketing, business to business marketing. Had my own agency for 15 years, a B2B digital marketing agency. And then I burned out on that. I got into podcasting, Michelle, and I don't know that you know this about me, in 2013. So I'm on my third podcast. I've published altogether more than 500 episodes in the last, call it 11 years or so. And my most recent podcast is called the Midlife Fulfilled Podcast, coming up on its third anniversary. Probably by the time this publishes, I will have hit my third anniversary in February of 25. And at the time of this recording, 213 episodes. So we'll be past that by the time this publishes. Um, and I recently shared the following story on LinkedIn. Going back to when I was in California, I received the first leadership role early in my career in the late 1980s. I'm dating myself. Now, you know, I'm not as young as you credited me. So I was in my first leadership role, and a tragic thing happened. A young lady on my team was killed in a domestic violence incident. And I had a team of about 7 people. And I immediately was put into that situation. Uh, and I just realized that not only did I still need to lead this team to do the work that we needed to do because we all had jobs to do, but I just intuitively, Michelle, just decided that I needed to lead these people with empathy and holistically as human beings, not just for the job function that they had. So early in my career, I was thrust into that scenario. And because of that tragic incident, I adopted this new way of leading people
Mhm.
because I had many other leadership roles beyond that in my career, but I always had that lens of leading people holistically as human beings and not just as whatever title was on their business card. Fast forward to these last few years, because that was back in the mid 1980s. And here I am hosting the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. And I built this whole platform on my podcast around what I call the 5 key pillars of life. And they are health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. Published a research report in October of 2024 that's a whopping 157 pages long with all kinds of insights on what makes people tick in midlife across those 5 pillars of fulfillment. And it led me to a framework, a leadership framework that is based on these 5 pillars and based on leading people through the lens of fulfillment, those 5 pillars in particular. So the reason I tell you the story about that tragic incident that I experienced in the mid 1980s or late 1980s when I was in my first leadership role is because I look back on that now, Michelle, and I realized that I became an unconscious competent. And that's an expression that I've learned many years ago. I learned that expression, like when you are good at something, but you don't really know why, you don't have a structure behind it, you're an unconscious competent. People who excel at whatever, fill in the blank, anything. It could be an athletic event or it could be a skill in, in work and really know their craft, those are conscious competence.
Hmm.
So today I'm a conscious competent because I'm teaching people through a framework that I deliver called fulfillment centric leadership that makes leaders conscious competence on how to lead their teams with authentic empathy based on those five pillars. So that's my backstory and how that incident, that tragic incident, I think of her often, by the way, because I mean, just, young lady just taken from us through an act of domestic violence but the impact that it had on how I lead people and now how I am. And, your podcast is all about impact, right? How I have been leading people unconsciously through that lens of holistic, authentic care for them as a person. But now I have a structure behind it. And my goal, and I just also announced this on LinkedIn, I want to reach 3 billion people. And here's the magic behind the number 3 billion. There's 8 billion people in the world. It's estimated 40% of them are over the age of 40. And I am focused on people over the age of 40. And I want to reach 3 billion people, which is 40% of 8 billion. And the way that I'm going to do that is not by reaching 3 billion people, but by reaching leaders and teaching them how to lead authentically through the lens of the five pillars of fulfillment. And if I reach enough leaders, and I will reach 3 billion people because every leader is leading 10, 50, 100, 1,000, 10,000, whatever the number is, right? And that's the focus that I have on impact in the world.
I
So
love
I'll
that.
pause there.
Oh, that's okay. You talked about a lot, right? You talked about a lot here, and we're going to unpack quite a bit of this. And I love that you talked about unconscious competence because oftentimes we go through something in our lives and we don't know why we're so good at it. I'm a speaker. I had no idea why I excelled as a speaker so much, but God has a plan. And no matter what it is that you go through in your life, He is able to mold the puzzle pieces together in a way that creates a beautiful painting. And you don't know much about me. So, my audience, I oftentimes have people come on and it's a blind interview. That's why we do it like this. Bernie, I run a nonprofit organization called Unsilenced Voices Combating Domestic Violence and Human Trafficking. I myself am a survivor of domestic violence. I went through a very, very abusive relationship for over 4 years, which then propelled me to take action. And those of you out there, it's very interesting. Bernie talked about this. He experienced this tragedy within his workplace. And because of the loss of her life, he now is making a difference and moving forward by teaching how to use experiences and tragedies to be consciously competent to excel even more in business and personal lives. So, Bernie, with me, right, I felt called to do something even more, and in 2017 founded Unsilenced Voices. We're a six-figure nonprofit working in multiple countries around the globe. And then 2019 I began speaking, sharing my story, published my first book called But I Love Him, and been on this mission ever since. Hence the reason we do Voices of Impact. So I just want to, talk about that. God works in very mysterious ways. Let me tell you what, and I love that. So let's kind of dive in here. You experienced this tragedy. You felt propelled to move forward, help these leaders, provide education, support people. Now, you've recently taken this transition to start your own entrepreneurial career. Why now, Bernie?
Well, it leads me to something else that I think we probably both know about God and how God operates, and that is that His timing is not our timing,
No.
right? And so the why now is all about that. This is God's timing for me. That's just all there is to it. The way things have come together in recent years. Again, I mentioned that I started podcasting in 2013, but it was the Midlife Fulfilled podcast that really gave me this focus. And after publishing weekly episodes, and I have not missed a single week, I publish every Monday on the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. It's been an education for me, and it's allowed me to develop this five pillar platform that I spoke of: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy, as being the five key life pillars. And then again, it's God's timing, where all of the education that I've been getting over the last 3 years, including the research report that was published in October that I did with Udemy, all of that just came together. And then it's like God gave me this concept of fulfillment centric leadership. And Michelle, I've been testing it with a lot of people. In 2023, the University of Notre Dame was my sponsor, and they have a program called the Inspired Leadership Initiative. So it was that part of the university that was my sponsor. So it gave me access to people at University of Notre Dame, pretty cool university, right? And I've been testing all these concepts with people there. And by the way, not just academics, right? That's a tongue twister for me. Not just the
Academia,
the people
yes.
in the academic side of Notre Dame, but a lot of business professionals, because this program is actually for business professionals. And they've just helped me to validate this. And so now I'm taking this to market. And the now is God's timing, Michelle. It's just that simple. I mean, I can't explain it any other way.
Yeah, that is so interesting, God's timing, because oftentimes, and the mass majority of the time, our time is not God's time. And there's certain lessons that we learn throughout the process in order for us to be prepared and ready for when it is God's time. I used to fight against this all the time because me being an entrepreneur and wanting to move very quickly, right? I'm kind of fast paced and I move very quickly. God oftentimes tells me to slow down. And that
Mm-hmm.
is a lesson for all of us that even if things aren't working now, they could work in the future. Same thing with the people that you meet. I just ran into somebody at a conference I spoke at last week. I mean, 4 days ago, not even last week, really, who I've been trying to connect with for 4 years. And now all of a sudden it is God's timing, and he is jumping on board with Unsilenced Voices and helping us raise over $500,000 in 2025 so that we can do the mission that God has given us. So you talked a lot, Bernie, about how you've moved in your life. Right. So you were born in New York, you went to California, you now live in Tampa, Florida. You ended up meeting your wife in the 90s in Cali. I myself am from California as well. I lived there for 13 years pursuing an acting career, and moved to Tampa January 2022. So let's backtrack. In the 90s, you're in California. How did you and your wife meet?
Okay, there's a story there. We actually met similar around the same time that I had that tragic incident. So we met in the late '80s,
Okay.
and so here's how we met. You know how there's dating apps today? Well, back then in the late 1980s, where there was no internet and there were no dating apps, there were dating services, and I was traveling with a gentleman who was about my age now. I'm in my 60s, and this gentleman was in his 60s, and I was in my mid to late 20s. I think I was 27. And I was riding with him. He was a work colleague. He was driving. I'm the passenger. He says, Bernie, I need to make a stop on the way home. It was like 5 in the afternoon. He stops and he says, I need to go in there. And I said, what's in there? And he said, it's a dating service. He said, wait here. So I wait in the car for like 30 seconds. No, I'm going to go in. So I went inside, and there were a couple of ladies there, like the front desk. And I looked around and I saw like a huge library of like VHS videotapes. And long story short, they just said, you need to be a member here. And they just gave me a deal I couldn't refuse. And in the moment, they were very friendly. They were great salespeople. So I end up joining this dating service, which wasn't even on my radar at any point in time that day or ever in my life. And my wife had come out of a relationship, so she had joined, and she selected me as like someone she wanted to meet, but along with like 10 other guys, right? So it wasn't just me. So a month goes by, Michelle, and I didn't respond. We're talking pre-internet here. You know how you respond? You go in to view the person on videotape to see who was on the other end of this card you got in the mail. So I didn't go in for a month because I was busy. And I finally went in. I said, "Yeah, I want to meet her." And so that's how we met. By the
Oh
way,
my
she
God.
she was not easy to agree to a first date because had been a month. She had already been on multiple dates with all these other guys she selected that she wanted to meet. So I had to convince her to go on a date. And we went on a date. And I guess you could say the rest is history.
Oh, I love that story. And the reason I ask about personal life is because it makes us authentically human, not AI people who are doing these interviews. But that's awesome. That's a super cute story. And I, sitting right now in December of 2024, am single and thinking about joining a dating site. I'm not sure if I'm going to or not, but you give me inspiration because back in the late 80s, there wasn't the technology available
Right.
now. And I just love that story. So you married, and then in 92, you said you had to drag her out of California to Tampa. What made you want to move from California to Florida?
It was really family related. I'm an only child, and my parents were living here. They weren't in Tampa, they were outside of Orlando, so Central Florida. And the cost of living in California was crazy even back then in the early 90s. And we had just bought a home. We had a humongous mortgage on it. And I just said, this cost of living is only going to keep going higher and higher and higher. And we had been here visiting the area. And so I convinced my wife that, we could relocate here. And she agreed to do it on the condition that, not that she said it that way, but what she wanted was, we were planning another child, and God blessed us with another child. And she said, "Hey, I'd like to really stay home with them." And I said, "Okay, we can do that in Florida. We can't do that in California because we needed both of our incomes for that humongous mortgage." And so that's what we did. And we came here and we lived near our parents. We actually convinced my parents to relocate close to us so that they could be near us. And actually, that was another God thing, Michelle, because again, I'm an only child. They were in their, I think, 70s at the time. Well, they lived into their 90s, and they, of course, had decline in health, and they needed me and my wife, both of us. And because they were living, we convinced them to live nearby. I was able to care for them. I had power of attorney. I was the one that, moved them to an assisted living facility and visited them every single night at the ALF, and eventually buried both my parents. But I was able to do it with them nearby, overseeing the care that they needed, as opposed to doing it long distance from California. That would have been a nightmare. So again, just another God thing.
Yeah, it's another God thing. I love that. So you talked a lot about how you now are using your voice to make an impact. You're starting an entire mission, it sounds like, in order to impact 3 billion people around the globe. So outside of the business, and you've kind of already answered this, but social impact is the currency of the future. How do you see yourself giving back?
Well, too many people think they're unhappy.
Hmm.
And in reality, a lot of people conflate happiness and fulfillment. And so I want to raise awareness of around the distinction of happiness and fulfillment. So happiness is an emotion, and it's a great emotion. We all want to be happy, but it's an emotion that can be fleeting. And fulfillment is more associated with achievement. And it doesn't have to be a big achievement. It can be little achievements. So I'll tell you a big one, and I'll tell you a small one. A big achievement is the way that I got my college degree. I went mostly at night, and I was very young, and I was working during the day, and I funded my college education at a private university in New York City, a school called Pace University. Probably not all that well known, but it's a good school and known in New York. That was a humongous achievement for me and a sense of fulfillment. And I always say fulfillment is immutable. Uh, so that's a big fulfillment. Little fulfillment is on a weekly basis. I aim to go to the gym 5 days a week, every morning, Monday through Friday. And so come Friday, if I've achieved that, and most weeks I have, I'm fulfilled by that.
Yeah.
So fulfillment is something that I want more people to understand. So from a social impact standpoint, I want people to understand the difference between happiness. If your sports team wins, you're happy for some period of time, but that doesn't give you fulfillment. That's not lasting. It depends on how fanatical you are, I suppose, about sports. But fulfillment is deeper. I say that fulfillment is soul level deep, and it's split across our five pillars: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. I often say, Michelle, don't ask yourself how fulfilled you are, because that's like trying to boil the ocean. Ask yourself, how fulfilled am I in my health, both physical and mental? How fulfilled am I in my fitness journey, which is important as we age? And I don't mean over 40 or over 50, just as we age in general. How fulfilled am I in my career? How fulfilled am I in my relationships, which is a big one? And how fulfilled am I in my legacy? You are having a humongous legacy impact through everything that you're doing, right? So your fulfillment needs to be off the charts on legacy. But it's asking that question across the five pillars. So instead of trying to boil the ocean in your sense of fulfillment, do it through the lens of those five pillars, because you can be highly, highly fulfilled in one area and not so fulfilled in other areas. Being self-aware of that is very powerful, Michelle, so that you know what actions you can take and you don't beat yourself up unnecessarily.
Yeah, no, I love that. Fulfillment is so important. I work with a business coach. His name is Mark Katz. Amazing, amazing guy. He's a part of, the Podfest community and all these other very, very large communities. And Mark and I actually got done talking today about fulfillment and achievement and soul searching to find out exactly the impact that you want to make and why us as entrepreneurs oftentimes do things that don't necessarily fulfill us. And we do things based off of the money that we can earn instead of the impact that we can make. And because of that conversation, there's a lot in my personal business. So I run a for-profit and I run a nonprofit. In my for-profit business, there's a lot that we are now going to stop doing, and it's income producing stuff, but it's it's not providing the fulfillment that I want in my life. And thank you for allowing me to, you know, live the legacy and do the legacy, but there's a huge, huge amount of work that we still have left. And that is what I want. That is my goal. That is my dream, is to leave that lasting legacy, because little old me, who started off in 2017 as a bartender pouring drinks, now gets to impact thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, and billions of people worldwide. And it sounds like, Bernie, you are one of those individuals as well, using your story, your five pillars, to help make that lasting impact. So just a couple more questions. And I know that this is quite short, but I would love to possibly have you back again once we launch and grow. But a two-part question. What does impact mean to you? And any last words that you would like to leave the audience?
Sure. So, when I think of impact, I think of really fulfillment, because if there's two dimensions to impact, there's the impact that I might have on the world or an individual, right? Two big difference, different scenarios, right? Or in my case, 3 billion people. So the impact that I can have is something that's lasting, that people can experience, whether they associate it with me or not. I'm not looking for the association. The other impact is how I'm impacted. So, when I experience someone like you having an impact on the world, that impacts me emotionally. It impacts my soul. It makes me feel really good about, what you're doing, and then want to know more about, how I can support you in some way. So it's a two-edged coin, right? What's the impact that I can have, and how I respond to others that are impacting the world. A closing thought, I think, is really just reiterating the distinction between happiness and fulfillment, and chasing fulfillment across those five pillars. Again, I'll say them one more time, Michelle: health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. Being self-aware of your fulfillment across those five pillars will really relieve some stress and give you some clarity on how to really go about living your life.
Yeah. And Bernie, how can people reach you?
So on social, and I'm mostly active on LinkedIn and Instagram at Bernie Borges. So last name Borges. And then my website is midlifefulfilled.com. And that's the podcast, Midlife Fulfilled Podcast.
Awesome. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Voices of Impact.